And thanks for joining us on PM Express. And I want to do something different tonight on the show. So 66 years of independence, I'm asking the question, why is Ghana still poor? Is the question we're asking on the show tonight. I mean, so this is just a statement, but the key thing we're going to look at, why we are still poor. And I am asking that question, and I'm taking it from a very personal point of view. I am 40 years, so I didn't see the immediate independence, post-independence era. I've just lived for 40 years in this country. And even in my young 40 year as a human being in Ghana, I haven't seen much of a change from what it used to be till now. There has been a change, right? There has been some improvement. But I bet, my experience tells me, that the progress that we've made in the last 40 years is pretty small. It's a snail pace compared to what we should be. Because if I consider that a country called Singapore under one president called Lee Kuan Yew could transform the entire country from first to third world in 30 years, tells me it is possible to actually fix this problem in my lifetime, to move us from first to third, from third to first world in that period. So why haven't we done that? And so I want to have this conversation. I know many of you have had this conversation on 6th March and question why are we celebrating independence. But I want to just flip it on its head a bit and ask the young person who possibly is my age and losing hope. And I am, because I've unfortunately done this job for 18 years, and the stories I've been engaging seem to be just repetitive, and it's a cycle, it's a vicious cycle of the old mistakes that we've done in the past repeating itself. And whilst I go through the slides, probably by the time I finish, you understand why I feel the way I feel. There are many young people like myself who also feel the way I feel right now. And I want to start with Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, because I think the thing to appreciate is the ambition of this man, our founding fathers. They had a certain vision of us. And we need to ask ourselves by the time we finish this conversation whether we have realized these goals and the ambitions and the picture they had of this country when they imagined Ghana 66 years on. He made this bold declaration that Africa is ready to fight its own battles and show that they are, after all, the black man. And for me, that's a key point here. That point about the black man is capable of managing his own affairs. It's such a powerful statement at the time that he made it. Just around the independence time. The black man is capable of managing his own affairs. I always ask that question. Each time we celebrate independence, each time I celebrate my birthday, I ask the question, so if I look at this country, 66 years on, have we proved Dr. Kwame Nkrumah right, or have we proved him wrong? When he said then that we are capable of managing our own affairs, now the jury should be out now, because 66 years on. Have we proved them right, that yes, we are capable, or have we proved them wrong, that no, we are not? We're going to ask that question. If you ask me, I think you probably would guess where I believe this is going. And thankfully, I'm bringing people who are not only far older than me, they've lived through the various stages of this country's development, and they've experienced it, but also they've studied it and they live it on a daily basis. So maybe I want them to convince the young people like myself why we should so have hope in this country and what it would take to transform this country to what Nkrumah saw when he did make this bold statement. And then he made the point that he wanted to create that, an African personality and identity, and that it is the only way we can show the world that we are ready for our own battles. Really? When we've gone to the IMF 17 times, well, that's another story we'll come to very shortly. And again, I'm going through this because this is, to understand this topic properly, you need to understand what the vision was and what the goals were at the beginning. And then we track back to 66 years as of last week and see have we achieved that. So one of them is we should be able to manage our own affairs. So if we were setting the goals as of 6th March 1957, one of the goals were in 66 years from now, Nkrumah was saying, by the time we get to 66 years, we should be able to manage our own affairs. So we're going to be measuring that. Have we done that? And then another one, He wants to build an economy balance between industry and agriculture. Ask yourself, 66 years on, have we done this? Industry and agriculture. Providing sufficiency of food for the people. Have we done this? 66 years on. Supporting secondary industries based on products of our agriculture. I mean, this is like planting for food and jobs. We still want to, one district, one factory. Nkrumah was saying this, set this as a goal at independence, right? Just post-independence era. And we're still talking about that 66 years on. We should be talking about something else, I believe, as a young man. We should have finished this and talked about this and done it, right? Focus on the development of the state and cooperative sectors. Regulate the pattern of state investment in order to give the highest priority to productive investment. And the story here is actually interesting because many economists have told us, especially in the last few months when we've been struggling with the economy, unprecedented economic crisis, is that we've invested not prioritizing in productive sectors, but prioritizing in consumption, buying V8s and spending money on our stomachs instead of putting it in productive areas. That's Nkrumah's visions. Determine and direct the forms and conditions of foreign investment. As for that is foreign affairs. I think even that we've completely abandoned it by now. It's a key thing that Nkrumah was hoping to do. Now, so this is one of the things I really wanted to draw your attention. 66 years of independence, the financial dependence is one of the key things when you're looking at. Ghana has been to the IMF 17 times, and we are waiting to actually get another one. In other words, when the IMF is in charge of this economy, we do well. When the white man is in charge of this economy, we do well. Immediately they handed it back to us, we run it down. That is the story of the 17 times. So each time we run it down, we go back to them, they take over, they fix the problems, we go back to them. We've done that 17 times. Is Nkrumah right when he says that we should be able to manage our own affairs? The black man is capable. Are we capable? That's a jury. I believe the jury is out there. So if we look at the facilities that we've gone to, these are the dates that we've gone 8 times. We went for the standby arrangement. These are the years, 1966, so Nkrumah himself was the beneficiary of that. 67, 68. So all that time was Nkrumah's era. But of course, I mean, he was trying to build a foundation there. His vision was that he will do this at the time, and then eventually we'll come out of this and we'll manage our own affairs by ourselves, right? But unfortunately for him, after he was overthrown, we kept on going back and going back and going back and going back. And we never stopped. In fact, we moved from the standby arrangement, we went to structural adjustment facility, 1987, extended fund facility, 1987. We went to extended credit facility. This is our favorite now. We progressed. Our dependence has progressed. It didn't stop. It actually became worse and worse and worse because this is a minimal intervention. I mean, for those who lived through the structural adjustment period, they tell you it was terrible. But then we've seen this now, right? And now we've gone there 6 times because we love it, right? That tells its own story. Our dependence. If you look at also the public debt in billions, and the story is told that when the whites, the British, left these shores and gave us independence, that we had the budget surplus. We had a surplus. We didn't owe anybody. And then within a decade or so, we were owing significant amounts of money. And since then, our appetite for borrowing and debt has grown. No wonder we are at this unprecedented stage in our history, where we are at 575.7 billion. It doesn't sound like a country capable of managing its own affairs with all the resources that we have. So we need to ask that fundamental question. Why are we still begging, borrowing after 66 years? I mean, for a young man like myself, I'm saying to the older generation I'm going to be talking to tonight that I am losing hope. They need to tell me in the next 1 hour why I shouldn't lose hope completely and just look to just escape these shores to a better place where they don't have 575 billion debt hanging on its head, that they are now reaching to individuals' pockets to try and fix this particular problem. And many people have said that this IMF program that we're in, which is the steepest, the worst we've seen, possibly won't be the last. But it's a story for all of you to observe. And then you look at the annual inflation, which also it's telling the story. We are comparing this to 19 This is 75. So this is 1967, right, all the way to 1965. So if we look at this is the average, by the way. So, and I know it's about 50, but we're doing the average because we have to compare over the years. 39.5%, or 51% is what we see as the average. If you compare it all the way to, say, the highest we've been, look at the time, look at us here. In 1967, isn't that a tragedy? We're doing so well then. We climbed and climbed to our peak in terms of inflation just around the 1983. Of course, I mean, I remember my parents telling me that 83 was terrible, right? You know, essential commodities were not available for people to buy. No wonder we were here. We are not there yet, but we are still not out of the woods yet, right? So this is really terrible picture. We're talking about economic dependence. Look at the Ghana minimum wage and international poverty. How many people have this country managed to lift out of poverty? And it's a very important point. The minimum wage, look at how it's been behaving. Look at the significant dip in 2021 that we've seen. If we look at the international poverty line, which is one of the key things that most development agents, and I thankfully have the National Development Planning Commission here with me, they tell you a story, a very, very terrible story. So we are not lifting our people out of poverty the way we should. But Lee Kuan Yew did that. He improved the per capita from just around $400 to almost $2,000 plus within the time that he was there. I mean, significantly, by 1990, they were in significant thousands of dollars. So it's possible. It is possible. Why haven't we done it? Is a key problem that we need to interrogate. And so tonight, I am going to sit down and listen to a conversation. If you're a young man like myself and have wondered why this has been the case, this is our story. It's not a good story. Let's ask those who have gone before us, who've lived it, and why has it been so? Why do we remain poor? But most importantly, how do we come out of this? And I'm very sure, tonight I'm going to be very skeptical. I'm very sure a lot of the things they will say, I've heard it before. I'm not sure they'll say anything new, but I still want to hear them. I'm not sure they'll say anything new, but I'm sure I'll hear them. So if I'm already anticipating I'm not going to hear anything new, the question is, why is that? Why is that nobody can, I'm hoping that they will say something really groundbreaking. But then even after that, why is it that we haven't fixed it? Is it leadership? Is it our citizens who just aren't holding people accountable enough? Stay with me after this break. My guests will begin to have a very honest conversation about this country called Ghana. As we celebrate Ghana Month, everybody is wearing kaftans and kaba and kente, and then after 1 month, yeah, we'll go back to our miserable old lives and then wait for the next year, and then we'll begin to wear kente again, and then we still remain poor. Don't take my word for it. The evidence is here. We are not getting people out of poverty. It's getting worse over the period. Stay with me. Dr. Yao Graham is a coordinator with the Third World Network Africa. He joins us on Zoom. Also with me on Zoom is Professor Bafwe Jumindua. He's a former UN governance advisor. And in the studio with me is Dr. Kojo Evans Mensah, who is the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission, NDPC. Thank you all, gentlemen, for your time. And I want to start again by laying the foundation. This is a conversation, I want to have this conversation from a point of view of a young man who just wants to listen and hope that I get inspired to start believing again in the Ghana project after 66 years old. And thankfully, all of you have lived this and have experienced the Ghana way better than I have, and you know far better. And so allow me to ask a few ignorant questions and hope that I understand why we are poor, because I've been struggling since 66, since the independence. And everybody was debating whether we should spend money to celebrate it or not. And I was wondering, why is that debate so important? And so allow me to ask a few of these very ignorant questions. And so I can get educated and hopefully get convinced that this project called Ghana, yeah, it can turn around to a first world prospect. Dr. Yao, let me start with you. So Ghana, 66 years on, the data shows that we aren't doing great. Do you agree with the assumption that we are poor and we have not really achieved the aspirations that we set ourselves at the time of independence?
Yeah, Evans, thanks for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. And as I listened to your opening thing, I became increasingly confused for a number of reasons. Because you made an important point about the need to evaluate what we have achieved or not achieved. But your opening thing runs the danger of factual misrepresentations, simple comparisons, okay, and also using data which are not comparable in support of your thing. So we could actually spend the rest of this program debating whether, in fact, the premise that you laid out is supported by the evidence that you offered. But we'll put that aside for a moment. But I'll start first by dealing the main point I want to make here is that there are a number of factual things I think we should correct. Nkrumah did not implement an IMF program. Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966. He was not in power in 1968.
True.
It is true Nkrumah went to the IMF. In fact, on 22nd February 1966, 2 days before Nkrumah was overthrown, Kwesi Amwakwanta offered the Ghana government's response to what the IMF was proposing. And that's quite a signal event because the Ghanaian finance minister stood up and explained to the world why they would not accept an IMF proposal. In mixing up the history and misrepresenting, we miss out on a very important element actually of the positive narrative that you yourself want to offer. Secondly, I think simple comparisons. This Lee Kuan Yew story, not only misleading, is completely irrelevant. Now, he was an outstanding leader. Why don't we talk about the Chinese lifting 600 million people out of poverty as the baseline from which we should be evaluating ourselves? The Lee Kuan Yew story is simple because we have this thing about Ghana and Malaysia and this starting at the same time. Now, the starting conditions of a country, okay, are very specific. The contexts are very specific. The challenges they face are specific. The opportunities they face are very specific. We should look to the Lee Kuan Yew and say, actually, it is possible to have good leaders who can help you achieve some things. But it has not become a simplified reference point for discussing achievements and failure. I think it's important to make this preliminary point because Obama came here, talked simple things, lectured everybody, and instead of people telling you you don't know what you are talking about, we celebrated his nonsense. So I really think we should start with our own reality and discuss it. Having said that, I think when we look at our history, we are entitled to say that we could have achieved a lot more. We could have achieved a lot more. But you see, the difficulty of this lot more thing is that unless you actually refer to a baseline that you are comparing and measuring your progress, it is difficult. I can't make general, I don't know what for you will be an achievement. Okay, using Nkrumah's reference, which are important. I'll take a number of those elements, particularly the economic and the social. Now, I think there's a self-flagellation out there that Black people have failed. I don't think Black people have failed. We have not achieved as much as we can, but we have achieved a lot. And what we have achieved, it's important for us to celebrate and also rigorously criticize what we have not. When the British, colonialism was not about development. So if you look across Africa, every African country was left with a raw material, commodity export dependent economy. Very little investment in social services. The only infrastructure investment was what was going to get things to the port. The economies were dominated by a small clique of foreign companies. Skills training was based on what was needed by colonialism, not to develop our economies. If you look at the progress we have made in terms of literacy, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of infrastructure and so on, we have achieved quite a bit. Okay, you should also ask yourself why even the Western powers, who unfortunately you simplify in talking about white people, I don't know it's a race issue, it's economic relations issue. Why do they continuously use Ghana as a reference point. I don't agree with them, but it is because there's something here which is worth pointing to. I think it's important to celebrate our achievements and then come to say that there's a lot we have not achieved. Okay. Having said that, I think the main failure really is our inability to transform the economy.
Okay,
that transformation requires being able to challenge the colonial relations that we have.
Okay,
one leader who tried to challenge those colonial relations was overthrown.
Okay, and in fact, I wanted to come.
Issue, but it's also an issue about Ghana's location in the global political economy and the kind of relationships that we forge with it. You presented a completely internal analysis of the Ghanaian situation. I think it's important.
Yeah, and I like the opening, and this is exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, I said I want to ask ignorant questions and get challenged and get hope back. So where you left off, I'll come back to that, which is the transformation. How do we get that done? I think you laid the foundation that, yes, we haven't achieved as much as we should, and there's a long way to transform. How do we get that? And why haven't we done that in 66 years? And let me come to Professor Bafo-Djumandua before I come to the studio, because he is a duty bearer. So I'll come back to you when you've heard everybody else. Professor Bafo-Djumandua, where do you start in this conversation, having heard your good friend, Dr. Yao Graham?
Good to meet you again, Yao. It's been a long time.
Yeah, indeed, a long time. Good to see you. Yeah.
Anytime I hear you, I get inspired. Very, very deep. Thanks so much for that introductory remarks. I will take off somehow from where you left. You see, when Nkrumah comes into the discussion, it's clear that he was far ahead of his time in terms of his understanding of the problem of Ghana and Africa generally, and in terms of the vision that he had for the solution. In fact, it was clear to him that gaining independence was not going to be all that we needed. We needed to take the second step to gain economic independence. And I think it's harping on the concept of neocolonialism, or simply warning us that following independence, if we do not work hard to restructure our internal economy as a way of affecting the global economy that I was referring to, then we are going to be in the state of neocolonialism. And that really hits on the head of the central theme of the discussion, which is dependency. Mm-hmm. In fact, I recall this long ago, my graduate days, I remember one Paul Baran, 1957, introducing this whole theory of dependency. And in the 60s, the Latin American scholars picked it up, and the famous one amongst them was Theodonos dos Santos, who really enhanced our understanding of the dependency theory. And finally, you may recall a Guyanese by name Walter Rodney, who published How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. If you look at this body of works, it's clear that the problem Ghana and Africa at large facing today is deeply rooted in the neo-colonial state that we have. And neo-colonialism is nothing more than depending on the external world. Further still, and at the core of that, is our dependence on raw materials. You see, there's a relationship between the global economy and Ghana, or so-called third world countries' economy. They classify the so-called advanced countries as the core at the center of the system, and we, so-called developing countries, we are at the periphery. And our role in that structure is simply to produce raw materials to feed these guys in terms of their development. And unfortunately, when Nkrumah saw, I believe Nkrumah saw that, that's why he decided to perhaps use a shortcut, using the state as the instrument of development and getting the state to embark on industrialization. Unfortunately, as we know, it didn't end too well for us. But that structure is where we are. We have been caught into that. There's that trap. And until, I think I was alluding to that at the end of his comments, until we get to that fundamental. You see, you are mentioning showing us figures of the IMF intervention, you have had 17, maybe you are going to 18. But on that table, Evans, there was one striking point. Besides the challenge that you has posed to you, it was interesting looking at it that between the years 72 and 78, there was no IMF intervention. Have you asked yourself why?
Why?
And the same period also, there was no borrowing. Okay? But of course, towards the end of that era, we also know that there was upheaval socially, and the economy also knows that. We all know that. That was during the period of General Echampo. There was no IMF intervention, and there was no borrowing. In fact, when he inherited the economy, the national debt was roughly $298 million. And when he brought the so-called Yentua policy, they wrote off the, I think, 200 or so. And then, so the point I'm making is that even in our own terms, there was a period where using the policy of self-reliance, within which Operation Feed Yourself was fostered on us, we were able to manage it somehow. We were able to limit our dependency, okay? But of course, I'm not saying it was successful, but at least we saw some glimpses there. So the point is that unless we attack that disease, almost all across Africa, if we continue to produce raw materials, rely on that, we are never going to get out of this. My final point before I give up. You see, recently, I read that we have discovered a very strategic mineral in this country called lithium.
Yes.
And as soon as I read that, I was telling myself, maybe I have access to that. I was telling myself, what was the nature of the contract that we have signed between ourselves and the American companies going to mine this? Because one of the sources of our dependence, not only in Ghana, but across Africa, is how we have sold out our raw materials, which will have served the basis for our development. But we signed contracts and gave them away and take a pittance in return. So if you look at the mineral industry across the continent, you will find that almost invariably, all the mineral wealth of Africa is being given almost out for free. So no country then can develop when the resources that will enable you to develop, you don't have the presence of mind to know how to negotiate to your own advantage. So simply put, I'm suggesting that one of the reasons we are poor, and we are poor not that we don't have the resources, because I remember not long ago, one political candidate, presidential candidate, said that we have resources. Why are we poor? Yeah. We are sitting on gold. So
it's a comedy.
Precisely. So that is. These are my initial.
Okay, but very interesting diagnosis. Let me come to the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. So, what's your diagnosis? I mean, and the thing about Commission is that you are helping us, guide us towards the development plan. But I believe to do that, you have to understand the problem first. So what's your diagnosis at the Commission?
Yes, thank you very much. Let me say, greet my seniors. And Prof he's been a mentor for me.
Okay.
And we've had the chance of working along the same line professionally.
Okay.
Yes, lecturers. We work with the Catholic Church, both of us. Worked as lecturers, university lecturers, worked with the UN. Maybe I have gone to NDPC and he hasn't. So that is, and then also Dr. Yagraham to be friends from there, and a clear mentor for some of us. But let me say that I take it from where they started, and in our diagnosis we do that practically every day. And that is the challenge here, because the parameters are changing, not on quarterly basis, but sometimes on daily basis. You need to monitor to be able to get a straight line. But it starts from, as you indicated, a production trend.
Okay.
Right from independence. It's very clear that we definitely have a bit of a discord between what we produce and what we send out. Most of the primary things we're producing right from God Jesus' time, we're still doing it. We're still practically a country that exports primary goods. These are minerals, agriculture, and even some of them going into lumbering and some of the things that we have naturally. These are things. And if you look at all of them, including cocoa, we still have a chunk of it exported in the raw form. And the new ones are not changing. We talked about cashew, which is quite recent, and we're still exporting it in the raw form. We still have new things which are coming up. Vanilla, I hear. And all these new things that we're talking about, we're still talking about the raw form. Maybe one thing that we've done quite well has to do with share, and which at least we process it into the batter before we send it out. But even that, there's a stretch of other secondary products coming out of that which we haven't. So that is the key discord. And if you look at that, it goes back to even basic economic theory, which has started that, look, you need to invest in primary, move to secondary and tertiary. And the secondary talks about industry and manufacturing. And that is the biggest problem now. If you look at the growth trend, the primary is increasing. It means that we're doing well in terms of agriculture, in terms of mining, we're putting well into that. But in terms of processing that, we're not growing that much. And if you look at the three sectors, what picks up is the service sector, which has to do with the things that we send raw outside, converted and brought back to us, and we exchange. That is trading, wholesale, and distribution. So if you look at those things, it tells you that in those service sector, they produce the least jobs among the three, because it's more technology based. It's more of exchange based rather than taking on people. So you realize that where the direction is going is reducing the job creation opportunity, because that lies in the processing sector where there's a combination of both technology and people. So this is something that we need to look at primarily. If you're not able to convert these goods, the industrial and manufacturing sector will definitely suffer. And once it suffers, it goes with the same trend way back from God's judgment. And if you look at our strategy...
So that will be your primary diagnosis?
That is the key.
Okay.
That is the key. Again, there's also a mismatch in terms of the skills that we are developing and the kind of anticipated industrial manufacturing processes that ought to evolve.
The mismatch between... Between academia and...
Exactly, what we produce in terms of skills. Again, the kind of skills that we are producing, if you want to go into industrial production, it should be something that is predictable, it goes with standards, it goes with what industry is demanding. But industry is demanding particular skills. We are also providing, an education system is also coming up with some kind of skills for which the industry, which requires it to be able to move to the next level, is not receiving. So that becomes another one. The third area also has to do with the kind of competition that we are in. And that brings the, I don't want to use the political term, but it's generally described by neocolonialism. Virtually contracting, virtually negotiating, and strengthening our means to also take advantage of ourselves when it comes to some of these negotiations. Virtually, if you look at some of these contracts and negotiations, it's like, take it. That's what we say. So we need to strengthen these three areas for us to create a level which is predictable, stable for the private sector to take up this thing.
Okay, so now...
Very, very important.
So now I understand all the problems that we face. But here's the question, Dr. Yao Graham. For 66 years, why haven't we fixed... Because clearly all of you know what the problem is. Why haven't we fixed this? Dr. Yao Graham.
Yes.
I mean,
you know, you brought in a very important issue, which brings us into really the issue of politics,
Yes.
leadership, policy choices.
That's right.
It's important to, whilst we are talking about we have not achieved as much as we could, to qualify that. Because this economy has grown exponentially since independence.
Yeah.
It's grown. Even though it remains a raw material commodity export dependent economy, it has grown. We are now a lower middle income country, although inequalities are widening in the country. But the economy has grown. It's become one of the things we do now is to show who is building a huge mansion, who owns some of the most expensive cars. It's become an industry, in this country. So there's a lot of wealth. And that, I think, is important because we need to remember that this model that we are saying is not ideal for Ghana. It's very ideal for some people.
So what model? What model is this?
This model that we are running, the model we just criticized, the economic model we just criticized, has expanded over the years. It's generating a lot of wealth. So some people are benefiting from this model. And that continued benefit is an alliance of domestic people and international firms. Let's go across. Who controls the financial sector in Ghana? Who, for example, annually syndicate loans to Cocoa Board? It's not Ghanaian banks. The financial sector is controlled by foreign firms. So economic surplus goes out. Cocoa Board, by and large, has handed a lot of its kind of a trading business to foreign firms. Cocoa, where the Cocoa Board used to be a source of domestic accumulation, it no longer is. Private firms, foreign firms are engaging in the domestic cocoa trade, almost back to what it was like the colonialism. Okay. Now we're talking about the mining sector. We have signed scandalous agreements. I've been involved in this work for many years. I mean, Balfour spoke about it. We could spend the evening talking about it. Whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's hard rock minerals, they have vested interest in perpetuating this model, which is why the question of power is very important. When we talk about Ghana being poor, it is not a uniform poverty. This model is very beneficial for some people. To be able to transform it, there should be the coalition for transformation would run into challenges. Nkrumah, in 1963, American intelligence, when they were really getting fed up, had a discussion about who would be good leaders, potential leaders, if Nkrumah was removed. This is 1963. One of the candidates they discussed as a potential candidate was one General Joseph Ankara. In 1966, Joseph Ankara was made chairman of the NLC when Nkrumah was overthrown by the CIA. Okay. Now, so this model, at the moment, just look at the way the world is playing out. This China, America has declared war on China. And there's a propaganda thing about how China is not good for anybody, even though China is the second biggest creditor to the United States. It's good for the US to borrow from China, but it's not good for the rest of us to do business with China. So they have vested interest, domestic and international. If you take the axis, for me, which worries me a lot now, is the axis between certain political sectors, foreign business, and key chiefs in this country. The agrarian transition in this country requires certain land policies. Unless those land policies, which require bringing the way certain chiefs have privatized communal lands to heal, you are not likely to get the agrarian transition, which creates wealth. One of the first things the Americans did when they got to Japan was to dispossess the samurai of their land and distribute land to smallholder farmers. They did the same. The same was done in Taiwan. Okay, so land reform, which will be key to a certain kind of agricultural productivity, agrarian income upliftment, and so on, requires a confrontation, or at least being able to push the powerful in a certain direction. So when we talk about Ghana being poor, let's remember that there are people who benefit from this model. And the solution, whilst it's a policy, a set of policy choices, behind being able to implement those policy choices is a question of what is the elite consensus around change and what political power is he able to mobilize. Because we can't discuss this thing as a technicist issue. It's an issue of political economy.
Interesting. I mean, so Professor Baffoyd, let me then, from what I've just heard doctors explain, ask another ignorant question then. So from everything else Doc explains, I feel, and this is something I share when I'm talking to my young friends like me We all say, look, 66 years. Everything else I've just heard, Doc, we just can't do it. I mean, we just can't do it. Because from everything I heard Doc just describe, the model, we know the model is a challenge, but we have Ghanaian leaders who are in charge of managing this model and fixing the problem. He just talked about the elite consensus, the political consensus. It's just to benefit a few. So let me throw that to you, the thing that me and my young friends talk about. Now listen, this thing called Ghana, we know the problem, but we just can't do it. Is that a fair point? And I'm saying it because this is not the young people.
That's not my conclusion.
No, I know that's not. I'm just asking a follow. I'm asking a follow-up question based on what I've heard you say. Because when we hear you say young people like me, we meet and you talk and we say, I didn't mean yet. Doc, Prof, I'm sure you possibly have children who are possibly my age. We meet and talk and we say that to ourselves.
It's not that old, don't worry.
But Prof, when I say that to you as a young man, what do you say back to me? Having heard everything I've heard you say tonight.
Yes, Evans, before I respond, let me make a point about something you mentioned. The cocoa syndication is something that really has scratched my head and I don't understand. That a country like Ghana, with all the brains that we have created a system where every year we go out to borrow $1.2, $1.5 billion to buy our own cocoa, right? We buy the cocoa, the income from that, I don't know what happens to that. Then the next year we go and borrow again and pay back from what we buy. So is it not possible for us to be making savings all these years for the buying of cocoa, for us to have 1.5 billion a year to buy our own cocoa? And that's why I agree with Yao. There's a syndicate. There's this what we may call alliance of the elites and the external elites who simply are not willing to allow, to open the doors for Ghana to grow. So that's just a point. Because if the cocoa marketing people are listening, my question is, why would they go every year to borrow $1.5 billion to buy cocoa? If the profits that they've been making, they have been saving the profit over 10 years, couldn't we have our own capital to buy our own cocoa? You go and pay interest every year? It doesn't make sense.
Perhaps
anyway,
you just strengthened my question. So on the back of what you just said, I am saying, because it's so obvious what you're saying. It makes common sense to me, but we haven't done it. So for 66 years, shouldn't we just give up on this project?
Evans, we can do it.
Convince me.
Because I sincerely believe that there is hope. And I think I like the way you did introductory remarks. That it's not that there's no hope for Ghana.
Okay.
There is. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a certain situation.
Okay.
Now, let me bring into focus what you call the intangibles of development. The intangibles, things that we do not see or we cannot touch, but they are very crucial. And that relates to the human factor of development. The human factor. If you study all the countries you care to study who have developed, you find a certain characteristic about the individuals who led the effort. Even Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir, and now today, Rwanda, Kagame. You study them and discover why is it possible for them to do what they've done. You see? So when it comes to the human factor, what I call the intangibles of development, it's clear that Ghana will have serious deficit in that. And that comes around the notion of leadership that you mentioned earlier. What kind of leaders do we get? You see, whenever it comes to political campaign for office, it has started already. And I listen to aspiring presidents of this country, and at times I bow down my head. Because they are not telling me anything sensible besides promising the school they will build, besides promising probes that they will conduct into some misconduct. They are not giving us a sense of a vision of where this nation needs to go in the next 10 or 20 years. All because, again, I have to admit, it's because of the political system we have imposed on ourselves. Because this system gives you only 4 years, at most 8 years. And if you look at all the countries that have developed that we care to cite, it did not take any of them 4 or 8 years to develop. And our system is such that even if a good program is initiated by a sitting government, the next government from a different party comes and they jettison that. So we do not move forward. I recognize and I agree with Yao, we've made some significant progress, no doubt. When we were growing up, these roads we see in Accra, they were not there. Even when I returned to Ghana in 94, Accra was like a village. Today, Accra is comparable to any, but these are things we see, you see. So I think we need to be looking at the human factor very, very carefully. We need to select people who demonstrate competence, experience, and exposure. Because you see, Lee Kuan Yew said something that I would like to cite. He said that his contemporaries and all these African leaders in the 50s and 60s were Lee Kuan Yew's contemporaries. Kwame Nkrumah, Nyerere, all of them were his contemporaries. He said that his contemporaries wanted a shortcut to development. That is why they used the state as the instrument of development. But he used private capital. I'm not making judgments here, but I'm just telling you how he did it. Private capital, that was long-term planning, strategic planning and all. And in 28 to 30 years, the country changed. In the same way, if you look at Mahathir in Malaysia, he was there for 24 years and things changed. You can, South Korea, the same. This military general, through coup, but he served his country. After that, he went to the convent, monastery, after committing all the crimes. But then, in his time, in 24, 23 years, South Korea changed. So longevity has something to do with development. I don't rule that.
So allow me to ask a very important question on the back of what you've just said there. Dr. Kojo, forgive me because I'll come to you on how are you fixing the problem, because you have a duty to bear. But Dr. Graham, on the back of what he said there, has democracy served us well then? Is it part of the problem?
Democracy has served us well. It's not part of the problem. Okay. You talked about leadership, and you talk about the simple vote gathering, patronage politics, which has become dominant. I mean, he made a point also. You see, if a party implements a good program, it will get elected. Those who demonize Nkrumah forget that when he won the 51 elections, the UGCC was so badly beaten, they dissolved. In 1954, Nkrumah won an election amidst the bomb throwing and so on. In 1956, he won an election. That party was not a party that shared T-shirts to people and had foot soldiers. It was the foot soldiers who financed the party. The party was owned by the members. So the social base was also the source of the programmatic orientation of the party, and also gave the government the strength to confront those who were opposed to change. So I don't think the problem is democracy, because a country like Sweden, the Social Democrats were elected continuously. In America, FDR, Roosevelt, was elected for 4 terms, and he transformed the United States, before and after the Second World War. So the thing about the agenda of leadership, which for me is tied really to benefiting from this model, because even as we are talking about this country growing, inequalities are worsening. One prominent political leader was so kind as to inform us that we should be grateful for what we have, because things are so hard in the UK that has brought his children back. That's sad that his children have to suffer in coming back to Ghana. But that shows that it's completely out of touch with reality. The president enjoined us to see that things could be a lot worse. When you lived under what, in my view, is the worst leadership in the country's history, I consider that an insult, because we've just been talking about visionary leadership and so on. This government talked about Ghana beyond aid, but did not have any, I agree with that, but did not have the programmatic orientation, the political organization, or the moral commitment not to collapse this country amidst a weather of perception that is the most corrupt and incompetent regime in our history. So it's not democracy. And there have also been authoritarian long-term leaders like Mobutu who collapsed their countries.
Okay. Let me come to you, Doc. Fortunately for me, you are the man tasked with the job of attempting to fix the problem. So let me ask you the question. How are you going about doing that?
Let me say that it's not just it's all of us.
I agree.
All of us fixing the problem. And what we're trying to do is to take it from what these discussions are bringing us to. We're identifying the problems. How do we put these problems in a system that all of us can play a role, take up responsibility, and be able to work towards a defined vision for ourselves and what we want to attain? Let me say that it's not all that bad as they've indicated. Because if you look at the trajectory, we've done very, very well.
Okay, yeah.
If you compare where we were at independence and the way we have moved to this thing, in almost all the facets, the social sector, access to water, education, health, all of that, we've virtually doubled in the percentage. If you look at the economic situation, even as we're in, and if you look at the kind of jobs that we are doing here and the variety of choices we have for ourselves as a country, it's quite enormous. If you look at infrastructure and services, it's the same. But the point is that where we wanted to be by 60 years after? And that is where the question comes, is no. Which means that we then need to look at the fundamental things, as I indicated. First, the people. Mm-hmm. What kind of people have we created? Mm-hmm. Okay, we've created a situation where laws, respect for certain statutes that we have fixed ourselves, we've come out ourselves. It's certain that we just overlook. Discipline is a foreign word for many of us. Going by what it is. The work ethics in terms of targets and production. I do not blame the people, but the system defines that. Because if you go to Europe, we know exactly...
But the people create the system.
Yes, but so it's vice versa. And you need to use it to sustain the character that you have formed. But if in any way it drops, and that is it, I go to work at 7, and I make sure I'm the first person to enter the premises before everybody comes. And I leave there at the point where I think we've gone beyond 5 o'clock. And that's something that I've been doing. And you realize that this is changing. This is an institution where people could come anytime and leave anytime. But look at the culture even after COVID. Look at our youth and look at the trend, the new thing they are discovering. It tells you that there is always the penchant for discovering new things and doing new things. And that's what we have seen. Now, everybody is talking about technology. How is that impinging upon our own production systems? How are we using that? Because I always say that my grandfather was a farmer, he used the cutlass. My father used the cutlass. If I have to go to farming today and I do it...
Probably have to start with a cutlass.
Exactly.
And then hope that one day you get a tractor on your farm.
But now technology is coming up. To what extent are we absorbing this and bringing it into our production process?
So tell me, what solutions is the National Development Planning Commission proposing to address this long term?
Yeah, great. Let me say that in all the development challenges that we are facing, it is not going to be just 4 years and then you are out.
How long do you reckon we need to transform this economy and this country to closer to first world?
We have a lot of trajectories and we've developed all those things. We're working on it day in, day out. And that is more of the technical side. But the interface with the people, the clear thing is that if you look at the development history and the way we have developed from 1960s all the way through, and the transformation, the opportunity for transformation, this is it. Whenever we go through some of these difficulties, and if you look at our history, as Prof said, it catapults us, it moves us faster. There's a new energy, there's a new pursuance by the Ghanaian to move out of this process, and always it shifts that. Now it is for us at National Development Planning Commission to take up this team and move with it. And we're hoping that if we're able to do that, a lot of the trajectories that we set for ourselves in a preparation of our long-term perspective should be able to attain. So we have two major things, 2030 targets and 2057 targets.
Okay.
At the time that we'll finish with the SDGs and at the time that will be 100 years, where do we want to be? And we carve it for ourselves that by 2057, at the time that we're 100 years, if anything at all, we should be counted among the developed countries.
Should be first world.
Yes. And
by
the potential,
2057.
Exactly. And the potential is there.
And can you bullet for me the path you have plotted to get us there? What is the path? Can you bullet for me?
What are
you saying we should do together?
One of the key things that can transform us, we've
already talked about the transformation.
The transformation.
So that's
that's one.
The industrial base.
Exactly.
The industrial base.
Exactly. And
refining and adding value to our raw materials is one of the things.
Exactly. And bringing this to bear on the kind of skills we bring up by way of our training.
Touch on that too.
education.
That's true.
Very, very important.
Okay, so that's two.
And then the other thing which is crucial, and Prof said it, is the person, discipline.
Okay.
Discipline.
Which you admit we don't have now.
No, it's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. You know, Dr. Graham also brought this down. Self-reliance. Things that we can do. Why do we have to shift it for somebody to do it for us? And it becomes a big challenge.
Self-reliance.
You see, it used to be a time that we're producing radio sets, although quite basic, Akasanoma.
Yeah.
Today, almost all these electronic systems are imported. But go by the street, you see the youth developing speakers, developing all these little things around us. What are we doing with that? So this is one of the areas we are looking at. I'm sure you've heard this several times. We talk about precision quality, setting up standards, and all these things. It's taking up the zeal and all these things that the youth are doing and bring it to the next level to enter into the production cycle. This is one of the gems that came up in Japan, in China, and the other places. What these young people have and how we can tame this. The other thing which is important, and that has to be, and I must say, leadership. But it's not just the political leadership. Leadership in our institutions that are supposed to perform is key.
You mean state public institutions?
Yes, state public institutions, and even in the private sector.
Okay.
And I must say that the private sector is even far better.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But in our public state
But interestingly, the people who are excelling in the private sector, if you move them to the public sector, you know what happens? They sort of drop off the face of the earth. There's something about the public sector.
And when you move the people from the public sector to the private sector,
they excel. So what is it?
It's the system. What has been created? Yes, because the private sector, I mean, I'm there. I will not let you joke with my resources and all this. The other thing which is important, and I must end, is accountability.
Okay.
We produce report, NDPC. We put it on our website. It tells you every year the performance of this country in figures. So we're trying to paint a certain trend to you for people. But I hardly hear people talking about it.
I'm happy you're here.
We launch it. We do all sorts of things around it in terms of our figures. A lot of the things which you have gone through before the COVID and after the COVID, if you go there, some of them were even predicted.
Let me ask a question now, bringing Prof. So we have 34 years more to hit that milestone when you say we should be first world.
Exactly.
Are we on track? Briefly,
well,
are we on track?
Well,
if you look at where we are now and where you reported it, are we on track? Or are we off track?
We're definitely off track. Okay. We're definitely off track, and we need to bring ourselves back. So we are working on it seriously to be able to get things. So we are reviewing. Let me say that you have a track, you have a trend, and if you go off, you need to review and find out some reasons to bring you back to that track. Okay. So if you look at it, the growth trajectory, for instance, 7%. That was it. And by this time, we should have been gliding at that time. Now, it's gone down. We're talking about 3.4 and others, which means that we're off track. If you look at what we intended to gain from oil, gold, and all that, one of the things we said was that there must be Ghanaian participation. So it's not just gold mines coming from outside and we working as managers. No, Ghanaians must own. But how many gold mine and extractives are Ghanaians?
So we are definitely off track, of course.
So these are some of the things we need to fix.
So that is the NDPC. They planned for us, and they've just delivered the verdict. We are definitely off track. So I need to ask you then, okay, can we ever get back on? I mean, this is after 66 years, we are still off track. So can we ever get back on track and achieve this? I wish I lived to see that, but I must tell you, young people don't have faith that we will get there. Prof, we are off track. Can we ever get back on track? Is this even possible?
Well, my good brother said it, but just a quick one here. I think under the previous regime, Neil Moy Thompson,
yes,
the guy who used to be there before my brother came, yes, together with Dr. Kwesiboche, who was the chairman of the NDPC, they came out with this 40-year plan, nicely done. I had the privilege of reviewing with some projections, and just like my good brother is telling us. The government changed, the new government came, and his senior minister told the whole nation, we're not going to work with this, at best maybe 10 years. And even then, we don't know what they did with that. So all the money, the time, energy, the brain power that were utilized in producing that, today, you and I ask me, where is that? So when my brother was talking, I was simply thinking, so if the government changes, with that prediction of becoming a first world country, that comes it is our political system. The political system is not supportive of long-term planning. So we need to change that. But coming to your question, look, for me, the most serious thing we need to do is to have, I'm giving two broad areas. First is what I will call the reducing or eliminating our dependence. And that cuts across our economic relationships, both external and internal.
Okay.
We need to do that. And that is where my good friend was saying, moving away from raw material to manufactured goods, all that come under that. We have to, like when Nana Akufo-Addo, our president, came with a notion of
one
Ghana
vision, one factory.
Aid. I was ecstatic. But just as my good brother Yao said earlier, there was no programmatic follow-up. So it fizzled out. But that concept of Ghana Beyond Aid is what can help us to reduce our dependence on the external economy, which means we have to gain control of our natural resources. If we are going to write an agreement, we're going to sign contract, please don't cut us short. We are selling our birthright to people with careless abandon. So that's one. The second broad area is what my friends have already alluded to, what I call the human factor, producing a new Ghanaian. Because the issue of discipline and all that comes under the quality of people that we produce. And for me, that goes down to our educational system. We have a very bad educational system in this country, producing people who don't even know their history. Go to the universities and ask people, you see, you don't have to have been born in the 1950s to know Kwame. I wasn't born when Hitler was around, when all these guys were around. You learn. But we don't teach our kids history, and therefore they don't even understand why we are in this mess. So our education needs to produce a new Ghanaian who will have a new orientation towards this country and how we can help ourselves without all the time resorting to foreigners to come to our aid.
Yeah, Prof, thank you very much. Dr. Yaw, I'm grateful that you join us. You speak and say the way it is. You give me a nice, good coaching at the beginning. I must say, though, that maybe I should just believe all of you that it's possible and give myself, because you are off track. You said we can come back. I mean, Prof said we can come back. And so we'll see. We'll keep track and follow and see what happens. But I'm grateful that you joined us in the studio. And all the best.
Thank you.
So the next 34 years, we need to come back on track and achieve that. Dr. Yaw, thank you, Professor Bafo Ichimendia, Dr. Evans Mensah, and all the best in this endeavor.
Thank
Enjoy the
you.
rest of your day.